All right, call to order the October 1st, 2018 meeting of the Arlington Redevelopment Board, recorded by ACMi. First on our agenda this evening is the approval of language for a draft zoning warrant article to be inserted into the town meeting warrant regarding recreational medical marijuana establishments. And we were just handed some language. I'll turn it over to Jenny to explain what we're looking at, and we can ask questions and discuss.
All right, thanks, Andrew. So next week is actually the first meeting of the marijuana study group, and we're gonna, first step is basically filing this for the special town meeting. The warrant opens and closes on Thursday of this week, so it is important to put something in the warrant so that we can then bring it to a special town meeting. I think I talked about the schedule at one of our last meetings, but just to refresh you, we will be pretty much posting the legal notice for the hearing, for the public hearing, starting next week. It actually is, the advertisement is due next Thursday or Friday, and then we will have it, run the ad the way that we run all of our legal notices for 2 weeks, 2 full weeks, followed by the first hearing date we agreed was on November 5th, and then it would be, if needed, continued to November 7th. The special town meeting would begin on December 5th. And at the moment, this is the only item on the special town meeting that I'm aware of. So with that, essentially what you have before you, and we've gone through this in past town meetings, it's just for you to look at the warrant language. This is not the detailed language of how we would be amending the bylaw. That'll be forthcoming. This is really just to capture all of the things that we think we're going to replace, amend, add, new, and have been working with staff to develop the language that we think will be most appropriate to both amend the existing medical marijuana treatment center language that's in our current zoning bylaw, and then also add for recreational marijuana establishments. It actually covers multiple types of establishments. It's not just one retail. That's been the most commonly discussed. There's other types of establishments as well that we may want to include in our zoning bylaw. So, so the language that I gave to you that differs from what was on the agenda, I'll just tell you some of the changes because I don't want you to be overly confused by the two. The agenda included Article 8. That we don't typically reference Article 8, which is technically part of the town bylaw. That's just a mistake, so I deleted that. That was actually repeated 4 times in here. And then the things that I included is, as posted, it says it's just about recreational marijuana, but it is also amending the medical marijuana, so we need to capture that in the article. And so with that, I threaded through out this language where we need to amend medical marijuana treatment center language, either existing language or adding something new, or changing the zones where we currently allow those treatment centers. Because all of that is up for discussion as part of 2 different things. One is where they would be located in town, which currently medical marijuana treatment centers are only allowed in B3 and B5, and we may be investigating expanding that to additional business districts and potentially the industrial zone. And then also the consideration of where to locate the recreational marijuana establishments. And then also figuring out the density between the other locations potentially of other marijuana establishments, because we need to think about all of that. Location is not just where one is located, but also the distance between 1 or 2 of them in town. So this captures all of that with a couple of additional words, and then also seeks to remove the moratorium. So I think those are all the changes that relate to what I had put in the agenda versus what you're looking at right now. So I'd be glad to talk with you about or answer any questions. And if you have specific comments or things that you think the study group should look at and investigate over the next really couple of weeks, please feel free to either email me directly or say anything this evening if needed. But I also understand if you need more time to digest it and think about it. The committee meets, committee meets on October 10th at 2:30. And Andrew is serving on the committee on behalf of the board.
Questions? Comments?
One, watch or two. Does this include like storage? I mean, I know this is talking about retail, but we're talking about storage and maybe growing. Does
Yeah.
that include that is it included in here?
So I'll actually review all the types of establishments that could potentially be a part of this. It would include marijuana cultivator, marijuana product manufacturer, marijuana retailer, independent testing laboratory, hold on, there's more, marijuana research facility, marijuana micro business, marijuana transporter, marijuana production facility, and marijuana retail store. So that's why common conversation is retail, but it actually is much more comprehensive than that. So those would be all the types of potential establishments is what we're calling them.
But no growing.
No growing, no.
Okay.
What's a cultivator?
Well, I mean, yeah, the cultivation and manufacturing, but it's not necessarily like we don't have the space requirements for a full grow, dedicated grow facility. So I don't think I don't know if that's in that Cannabis Commission handout, but we're gonna look at establishments that would be authorized to cultivate, manufacture, process, or package cannabis or marijuana products. That would be that type of facility. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's only growing. It's potentially additional things as well.
So when this uses the term recreational marijuana establishments, are we intending that to mean all the things that you just?
That covers everything. Yeah, marijuana establishment is defined as all of those things that I just mentioned.
And that will be in the definition.
When we get to inserting definitions, it would
Okay.
cover all of
Got it.
those such establishments.
I mean, it looks like there are 11 different levels of cultivation facilities permissible. So you could have someone growing in a facility under 5,000 square feet, it looks
Mhm.
like.
Yeah, it just would be more than a grow facility. It would be a cultivator. It does more than just cultivate. They do processing, they do packaging, all the other things that I was mentioning before. So that's what I was trying to just clarify, more than just the grow.
I get it.
And then in industrial, they could grow and also sell retail. It could be both, potentially, if that's the route we take.
The reason I asked about growing is I just envision like fields of the stuff surrounded by barbed wire or something. And,
It's actually more likely to be indoors, I think.
Oh,
Yeah.
really? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, I'm just trying to envision what this might be.
Mhm.
Don't have experience in this at all, so I'm not sure what to expect. I'm just thinking, are we gonna have to, I assume this makes a lot of money, so that people will do it. So I think you're taking big patches of land and just growing with barbed wire around it, and that's something.
I've heard at least one other community in Massachusetts was looking at converting an existing multi-story industrial building into an indoor grow facility.
Okay.
So a lot of square footage, but entirely indoors.
Yes, I've heard of one that's out in the west where they're taking a shopping center that's defunct and using a shopping center as that. And then they, but we don't have that here.
No,
No.
not likely. But possible that it would be more like an indoor grow facility.
Can I just follow up on this conversation? I'm not sure this is necessary, so I put it out as I just wonder whether after the first time here we use the term recreational and marijuana establishments, we should have a parenthetical that says something like including but not limited to, and list those things, just because I think some people will interpret, or could interpret recreational marijuana establishments to just being actual retail store.
Yeah.
And not the other things, and so to give
So I think
adequate notice
leaving
in
it
the warrant.
as recreational marijuana establishments for the purposes of, at least of the warrant article, is fine.
You don't think that?
I think leaving it as open-ended as possible, because people will have questions about what those are, and we can answer those. But I don't want to start listing those things out, even if it says including but not limited to, and then having a problem with what the actual zoning warrant language looks like
Okay.
a month from now.
Okay.
we'll define what those mean, we're in the process of defining what those mean.
So we think this is, using that term is broad enough so that it gives people adequate notice.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think there'll be a lot of attention on this, no matter what it says.
And they'll have the actual language available before.
Oh, I know, I
Oh,
understand
yeah,
that.
you'll
but-
have it for the
but
hearing.
The warrant article, what the actual languages can't go outside the bounds of the warrant article.
Right.
So the question is whether using this phrase
Mhm.
gives enough notice. And I guess Andrew and Jenny think it does. so-
And town council has reviewed this, so it's within the confines of what we would typically issue for, the warrant is usually a little bit broad enough, but also
Right.
specific enough to
Right.
explain what we are amending or modifying or adding to,
Okay,
but then allows us some flexibility in terms of development of the specific language, and also allows you the flexibility to amend that language once we develop it. So, just in keeping with the whole process. It is a good suggestion, though. I can live with it or without it, actually.
no, I mean, if you and Andrew are comfortable with it the way it is now, I'm okay with that too. I just put that out as a question. I do have one other question.
Go ahead.
It has to do with the part where it says amending section 3.4 environmental design review to include recreational marijuana establishments is required to obtain an environmental design review special permit. That's fine, and if you look at the criteria, none of those criteria deal with what may be some of the things that get added to Section 8 special regulations for medical marijuana facilities. And I don't know whether this should say to include as required to obtain an environmental design review special permit and meet, I'm not sure if the word would be, meet the requirements of the special regulations that are established. Something like that. So that there's a direct tie-in from the environmental design review standards to the Section 8 rules. And I'm not sure, Jenny and I had a phone call about this today, and I'm just not sure whether that's a good idea or not, but it does allow us to, in determining whether to issue this special permit, to look at the Section 8 rules that come up. Whereas I think if I were to read what right now is in the design review, I don't see something that would allow us to do that.
So I can tell you the answer that I provided earlier, so for the
Right.
benefit of the full
Yes, do
board.
that.
Which was that, again, in the warrant, we wouldn't put that kind of language in the warrant article, but that would be a very, very, the kind of thing that we could definitely reference as part of the amendment to 3.4, if we think that that's something we would like to reference, or cross-reference is really what you're speaking to. This similar to, we were talking about parking regulations, where we reference other sections within the bylaw that you need to also meet. That can all be part of it, that doesn't necessarily need to fall into the warrant.
Right. Yeah, although there's enough parking stuff in some of the existing language that makes it easier to fit in
Mhm.
as opposed to where we may end up going with marijuana facilities. There might just be something, what's the last one, L, there might just be an M that says, for marijuana facilities compliance with 8.3 or whatever.
Yeah, that's
language
exactly
turns
how
out
we
to
would
be.
Yeah.
consider amending
Yeah.
it, but for the warrant
You don't think that's
language,
necessary?
we don't the tradition has been we don't typically get into that level of detail unless there's, we
Okay.
amend at this level
Okay.
and reference that in the warrant so that we have, again, a little more room. And also, without the marijuana study group having met yet, I would like them to be able to weigh into how they want to, or if they want to guide us on the special regulations and make some recommendations back to the board. I don't think this limits us from doing that, I guess is still the main point I want to emphasize. You can still amend section 3.4 by adding this new use category and cross-referencing another section of the zoning bylaw.
Right, that's really a question about whether this language is sufficient to do that or not.
It would be. This is this,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
Other questions? You haven't made any amendments, so I would just ask for a motion to approve the draft zoning warrant article for special town meeting.
I so moved the one that was handed out at the meeting,
Yes,
not the one that
yeah.
was in the agenda. I so moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Good. Thank you. Moving on to update on multifamily zoning analysis and project. And this is another subgroup that I have been participating in, but we've only met once, so I'll turn it over to Jen to kind of explain what its genesis is and where it's going.
All right, thanks again. So this is the genesis of this. I think I've shared at prior meetings, some of the genesis, but essentially it's directly from the housing production plan. One of the first things that the housing production plan talks about is amending their zoning bylaw to accommodate for more diversity of housing types, and also to look at the special permit conditions and situation that may potentially impede development of a variety and diversity of types of housing. So we have been working with MAPC through a district local technical assistance grant and other funding as well and I gave you a copy of the scope of work. We've been working with them basically to do a parcel analysis to look at densities across town and in other examples, things that have been permitted in the past or that currently exist. And then we've been looking at various sort of dimensional regulations and the regulatory environment to develop multifamily housing in Arlington. They also referenced you may recall the RKG audit, the zoning audit from the master plan, and then there was a subsequent follow-up audit during the zoning recodification process, both of which heavily encouraged the town to explore going from special permit uses to more by right uses, and also talked about how to increase housing as a result of that, particularly multifamily, where it's not allowed necessarily by right, but goes through a special permit process. So those were some of the things that have been referenced through this, and essentially what I've given to you is an update on where it's at right now. We are, there's a couple of tasks that remain, but so far what's been completed and was shared with a small group that Andrew was referencing, basically sharing the materials that I've given to you this evening, which include the parcel zoning analysis that looks at minimum lot size, existing zoning, and various examples throughout districts in town. Looks at the various density examples, and then also provides just an update on lot size and density requirements, the existing conditions, and some of the very preliminary recommendations that we are investigating. The next step in the process, and I can talk about how illuminating some of the findings are in a moment. The next step in the process is that you may have noticed that there's been one parcel analysis of just as a place to look at is the Walgreens site on Mass Ave, which was a location that was identified in the housing production plan. Does not mean that we are working with the property owner in any way to go in that direction with that property site, but is simply noting that there's a large parcel. It is one of few large parcels, particularly along Mass Ave. And so we wanted to take a look at and explore sort of what prototypes would look like using our existing zoning. And so that's one of them. Then we're going to do 2 additional analyses on other parcels. And that'll be then followed up with zoning recommendations. Whatever the zoning recommendations end up being would then turn into potentially a future zoning warrant article for town meeting in the spring. So this would be coming back to you likely in, my guess is probably later next month after marijuana establishments is over. And then that's the run into the warrant for January that goes into the annual town meeting. So the illuminating things are basically just looking at what we currently allow, and then also looking at the densities on sites where we thought we had a lot of opportunity, how limited those opportunities actually are, and then just looking at the limitations in general of a special permitting process in those locations. So those were a couple of my takeaways. guess I would see if, Andrew, if you wanted to add anything.
No, that's about it. I think if you could provide the rest of the board with the Walgreens study.
Yeah, I thought it was
in the
in
packet
here.
here.
It's not in this
No,
package.
okay,
No,
I'll give you the
It was
Walgreens
really
one.
enlightening to see how such a big parcel is so limited by what's currently allowed for large
Sorry,
scale
I thought that was in
sites.
this.
It's worth taking a look at.
I will forward that, and I'll actually post it as part of
And
the
the
materials.
photographs that are included as well benefit from color, but it also gives you a good idea of what's been built in town over the
Yeah.
last few years.
It's in one of these,
Online.
right?
And,
Yes, it's in the-
yeah, if you, yeah.
It's at the end of the agenda meeting, yeah.
But it's worth looking at to get a sense of what kind of opportunities are out there, what kind of opportunities have been missed in the last decade or so, where things have gone up in Arlington Heights, for example, and they're single-use buildings as opposed to mixed use. So gives us an idea of what to look for and what kind of ideas to target as we go through this process.
Which included things like open space requirements and the way that we define open space as well as parking requirements. I think even how we look at the height buffer could stand for some modifications. That buffer is actually very large. The Walgreens site really shows that.
Yeah.
So I will definitely forward that to you and share it publicly as well, of course.
So I read all of the things that you sent, thank you, they're very enlightening. Looking forward to read the Walgreens thing. And I did see the notion that, I won't say that too many things require special permits, but the suggestion that fewer things require special permits and more things be built as of right. But I know that's sort of the gold standard of a lot of planners, but I didn't see anything, and maybe I missed it, that sort of said, because we require special permits, these things didn't get built. You know, at least everything that's come before us during the time I've been on the board, we've ended up saying yes, and I think sometimes the changes that we've suggested have made the buildings better, because they did have to come before us. So I'm just wondering if there was any analysis of what got built that would have been built differently, but for having to go for a special permit as opposed to as of right.
I think it's more about the densities, and not necessarily that it couldn't be built or wouldn't have been built. It's just more that, if you look at, like Arlington 360, there's a couple of other locations that are noted in here. Other densities could have been explored. I'm aware that that has a long history, so I don't want to specifically open that one up. But other locations have higher densities, and we actually can't have those kinds of densities now. So for example, if you go to the one that's basically the Capitol block in East Arlington, 202 to 218 Mass Ave, which was built in 1915. 975 square feet per unit plus retail, totals 25 units. This was actually this was the gold standard when we adopted mixed-use zoning. But after a lot of the exploration through this, there's not a lot that we actually would ever build as a result of our mixed use that would look like this, because of all of the other requirements. Granted, this is grandfathered in at this point.
Right, so it's not so
But-
much special permit as
Yeah.
opposed to as of right, as all of the underlying zoning
And
requirements.
capturing the, yes.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
what I thought.
Yeah. And by right doesn't necessarily mean by right and you go get a special, a building permit rather. It could mean by right with standards, and that's what we would likely be recommending, and by right with site, some sort of permit review by staff or by the board. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't go through some sort of review process.
Gene, are you thinking that maybe projects just didn't happen because of the current limitations?
No, I was just wondering if there were examples of projects that didn't happen because a special permit was needed.
I mean, is there any way to know that?
Well-
If somebody doesn't want to initiate a project because of,
Well,
they have to
that's-
go
I think
through
the
the
only way
special
we know that
permit
is through the
process?
history of the planning department or by talking to developers who did their own homework and decided it wasn't worth the time. and expense to
Well,
go through.
not only that, but if you look at the surrounding towns, and we look at the number of growth in projects that have been going on in the surrounding towns, and you look at the number of projects in this town. I think we're really far behind in new projects in this town as compared to other towns. And one question is, why?
Right.
Is it your special permit thing, or is it some sort of zoning requirements that we have superimposed on the stuff here that's holding this growth back? And maybe we want that.
A lot of it is a holdover from the old zoning bylaw and the way it was written and the way it was enforced. And now that we have a new zoning bylaw, we can start to make changes to open those things up. It's also limited by the size of the fact that most of the lots that we're looking at with this project are on commercial corridors, and they're just tiny lots. And it takes someone with some money and some vision to aggregate some parcels and start to turn those over, which hasn't happened yet.
Oh, sorry, did I interrupt you, please?
But I think they all feed into each other,
Yep.
where no one's willing to do it because,
Well, I was looking at this,
Yeah.
and yeah, there are not that many lots available for these larger projects, let's say these 50 to 100 unit projects, which gives us a better diversity, in which I think what we're trying to look for here, which is, diversity of, elder, economics, everything. So there's a bunch of small projects that, like 4 or 5 units, or 6 units, or whatever, that's right along this corridor here, that skirts underneath the affordable
Right.
regulations, right? So this doesn't give us the diversity that we're looking for.
right.
So that's, I think, what this should focus on is along these economic corridors where we have all these smaller chopped up sites, how can we encourage a more diverse development here? And so I'm looking at some of these projects here, and these are pretty good examples. Some of them don't really apply, but if I look at one I thought was really nice that could work in these smaller projects here, and I can't seem to find it now.
Something illustrative or existing in Arlington.
No, not existing in Arlington.
So there's a combination
Yes,
here.
there's some all over, some of these big projects like Everett, the Boston ones, and it's not gonna, we're not gonna fit in here, okay?
Yeah, no, and it's
Yeah.
just meant to illustrate
Yeah.
what density looks like
Yes,
in different.
and those cities would be nice, but
Yeah.
we're not that type of city.
Right.
I mean, maybe if we give up the car dealerships, or all that area there, that might be enough for 1 or 2 projects in that area there. But that's all zone industrial right now, which you can't have any housing.
Well, that's part of this conversation, would be amending zoning districts
Yes,
to
that's-
potentially allow for that.
Yes, a mixed use, not a, so,
Mixed use with
I mean, that's the
residential.
only area besides, you're correct, the Walgreens site. So, I don't know, maybe I'm rambling a little bit here, but I think we have to focus more on the smaller units and what kind of units we can fit in there that gives us the diversity and how we can encourage that. And that's either maybe in a reduction in parking, which allows more units, and it's right on commercial where there's mass transit. And I think combining those two could help a lot. And they free up a lot of, and right now we're, what, two parking spaces per 2 bedrooms?
Yeah, I think the
Yes.
parking discussion is one that is happening in that committee.
Okay.
Talking about different incentives and different
So-
controls on parking and how to add units and take away space and move open space and tackle these things. I don't want to say everything is on the table, but it's a broad discussion.
Yeah.
So one thing that struck me is, I think one of the reports said something like 50% of the housing stock in town predated the adoption of any zoning whatsoever. And looking at the current analysis from MAPC, where 67% of the residential parcels, well, in residential districts, are still non-conforming after many decades of having zoning established in town. So that, to me, says that we haven't found, we're not well matched to either what the existing zoning was aiming for, or perhaps what we want today.
Mm.
I think that's correct. Both those statements are correct.
And
We're
we've
not-
we've never been well matched if that
No.
non-conforming percentage is still so high.
No, and that's why step one was recodification, and step two is actual change, substantive change.
Yeah.
Because you're absolutely right, we're not well matched to the way zoning is currently written, and it's not.
Well, or to the existing condition.
Right.
Yeah, or what we want, so we're kind of failing on all three levels.
One
Yeah.
of the big things is like in R1 areas, I think it's 6,000 square feet minimum lot size.
Mhm.
The majority of lot sizes in Arlington are 5,000 square feet.
Mhm.
Right.
That's just a bust. I don't know what you do. Everything's not conforming then.
Yeah.
Yeah, not that uncommon. I mean, in multiple Massachusetts municipalities, unfortunately. So I don't know that this necessarily addresses that issue specifically, but
I think I think it's
it
one
may.
link in the
partially.
chain that addresses that issue with every other committee that's talking about zoning. And I think all these conversations are happening amongst a lot of different groups and committees, and
Mhm.
everybody's coming to the same conclusion. So,
I mean, it's at least one analytical data point that shows how our current zoning is not working.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So just two things. One is I'll share the Walgreens site analysis with you. And then the second thing is, somewhat related to this, we're also working with MAPC on the Arlington Heights plan, this neighborhood action plan. And that too has zoning recommendations, kind of like the ones that we're already talking about, but it doesn't just, it's not just about housing, it's also about the commercial district and encouraging more mixed use and potentially amending the mixed use zoning in that district to really, and in the industrial zone, to really accommodate mixed use more, which is what we want. And there's a public forum on that this Thursday night at Dallin School from 7 to 9 p.m. And then also, we will be planning a forum for the multifamily zoning conversation, so not just, coming back to you with what the zoning recommendations will look like, but we'll also do something more engaging with the community. So, more to come.
Anything else?
I don't think so, no.
I didn't just,
Yeah.
I meant from everyone.
Oh, sorry.
Steve, name and address, please.
Yes, Steve Ripplelock, 111 Sunnyside Avenue. I also enjoyed reading MAPC's materials, particularly the document that did sort of what-if scenarios related to dimensional requirements and lot conformance. Under current, I forget what the specific example was, but it might have been lots in R4, but under the current dimensional and density regulations, 2/3 are non-conforming. If we make this change, well, then we can get 50% conformance, and if we make this change, we can get over 90% conformance, which it's a very good way to, I think, illustrate, what things are actually like on the ground. And that I agree that it makes a point that perhaps some of our dimensional requirements are perhaps more restrictive than they need to be. I also like some of their recommendations. I thought they made some sensible recommendations regarding special permits, like being able to construct a 3-unit dwelling by right in R3, which is a 3-family district. But I'm looking forward to seeing what comes of this. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. We'll report back in a few weeks. Other business questions, concerns, anyone? Okay.
Our next meeting is a week from this Monday, right?
It's October 15th, and I think I heard back from everybody but Andy about participation.
Okay.
Yeah, so I can follow up directly with Andy about his participation so that you I know that you might have a conflict.
Well, I either drive back here, straight back from South Carolina, or I stop off somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do we,
We have a public hearing that evening, so, on a development, so that's.
all
So
right,
I-
so if we don't
yeah.
have quorum, we just notify the applicant.
We will
We
notify the
can continue
applicant.
this, the vote, to be that you caught up.
I'll try to be here,
Yeah.
but I don't want to be unfair to the,
Mhm. But I'll follow up with Andy.
Yeah, it should be. All right,
Move to adjourn.
second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.